Welcome to the debate. Today is March 7th, 2026, and we are sitting right at this incredibly fascinating, almost electric intersection on the sporting calendar. Yesterday, the Milano-Cortina Paralympic Games officially kicked off over in Italy. At the exact same time, the NCAA basketball landscape is just hurtling towards Selection Sunday, and we're only days away from the NCAA Division I Indoor Track and Field Championships in Fayetteville.
Yeah, it is easily one of the best times of the year to be a sports fan. You have all these different disciplines peaking simultaneously.
Exactly. And when you look closely at this specific window of time, watching these athletes across the snow, the hardwood, and the track, a profound theme emerges. It's a concept I've been calling the persistence audit. It's basically a real-world framework for evaluating how progress toward a monumental goal is actually achieved, not the corporate jargon version of goal setting, but the gritty physical reality of it. Today, we are debating the core driver of this audit. My position is that elite persistence is structurally driven by accumulating a massive volume of starts to build defensive consistency and outlast the conditioning phase.
I come at it from a different way. I think the romance of just showing up is a bit overplayed. My position is that sheer volume is completely meaningless without the precise efficiency of execution under high-stress conditions and the utilization of external guides.
I hear that, but to really build a persistence audit, especially if you're listening right now and trying to apply this to your own life, your career, or your own goals, you have to start by quantifying your runway. I call this the start count. It is the absolute foundational pillar. I want to talk about Laura Piroveno, the Italian alpine skier. Just recently, she captured her first career World Cup downhill victory in Val di Fassa. Do you know how many World Cup starts it took for her to reach the top of that podium?
I believe it was over 100, right?
Over 120. 120 starts. I want us to really sit with what that means psychologically. Think about packing your bags, traveling across the globe, dealing with knee pain, inspecting the course, sitting in hotel rooms, and stepping into the starting gate 119 times, only to not win.
Wow, yeah.
Right? Most people quit after 5 attempts and call it a failure. When we evaluate persistence, we have to entirely redefine our relationship with failure. If you are writing down your own persistence audit today, list your total number of starts toward your specific goal. If you are under 100 attempts, you aren't failing. You're simply evaluating a conditioning phase. The volume itself is the mechanism of progress. You are buying the psychological shielding required to eventually win.
That is an incredible story, and Pirovano's grit is unquestionable, but we need to look at the actual mechanics of that breakthrough. She didn't win in Val di Fassa just because the universe decided it was her turn after 120 tries. She defeated Germany's Emma Aher by exactly 0.01 seconds.
A razor-thin margin.
Exactly. And that 0.01 margin is not achieved just by showing up over and over. It is dictated by absolute technical precision. Volume without precision is just repeated failure, deeply ingrained into your muscle memory. To pass the persistence audit, you need what I call the technical check. Think about the para-biathlon events happening right now at Milano-Cortina. Let me paint a picture for you. These athletes, whether they are visually impaired, standing, or sitting, are absolutely redlining their bodies. They are cross-country skiing across grueling terrain, their lungs are burning, their chests are heaving, and their heart rates are spiking to maximum capacity. And then, they have to ski into the shooting range, pick up a rifle, and hit a target the size of a coin.
It is physically contradictory. You are asking the body to do two entirely opposite things.
Precisely. It is one of the most technically demanding disciplines in existence. If an athlete's pacing strategy, the sheer volume and effort of their skiing, interferes with their technical efficiency, their heart rate will cause their rifle barrel to bounce. They literally have to time their trigger pull in the millisecond between their own heartbeats.
Right.
In that scenario, the sheer volume of their skiing effort actually becomes a liability, not an asset. If you just ski harder, you miss the target. So, if you are doing a personal audit, You have to ask yourself, is your sheer effort interfering with your technical execution? Persistence isn't just surviving the distance, it's the ability to execute a hyper-specific technical requirement when your body and mind are under maximum stress.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how volume actually interacts with those high-stress situations. You are assuming that technical precision exists in a vacuum. It doesn't. You cannot even get into the position to fight for that 0.01 margin unless you have completely normalized the high-stress environment through relentless volume. Let's pivot to the hardwood. Look at the UConn women's basketball team right now.
A very young roster this year.
Incredibly young, and they take hits during the regular season. But Gino Auriemma and that coaching staff use these late-season conference games strictly to gain momentum heading toward March Madness. They are actively utilizing the volume of the regular season, the grinding travel, the hostile away crowds, the missed shots, to build a psychological shield. Every single time an 18-year-old freshman steps onto the court, regardless of the immediate micro outcome of that specific game, they are adding to their start count. The sheer repetition desensitizes them to the pressure of the arena. When March rolls around, the environment isn't overwhelming anymore because they've seen it a massive number of times. The start count is literally the price of admission to the results phase.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Normalizing the environment through repetition does not automatically bestow the mechanical corrections required to win. Momentum without technical precision is merely velocity, and velocity without control leads to a crash.
A crash. That's a bit dramatic for basketball.
Well, let's take it out of basketball and put it back on the snow. Look at the women's para-snowboard cross events happening this week. You have athletes like Brenna Huckabee, a multiple-time Paralympic medalist. The snowboard cross is dramatic head-to-head racing. It is 4 riders dropping in at once, navigating incredibly technical jumps, sharp turns, and high-speed sections. They are fighting for the exact same racing line. If a para-snowboarder relies purely on the psychological momentum of having raced 100 times before, but fails to execute the precise technical edge control required as they launch off a 50-foot jump, they don't just lose the race, they crash. Literally.
Right. The stakes of the technical failure are physical.
Exactly. Breakthroughs do not happen simply because you refuse to quit or because you built up a psychological shield. They happen because you possess the presence of mind to analyze the failure, initiate a microscopic technical adjustment, and execute it perfectly under the ultimate pressure. If you are auditing your own goals, you can't just pat yourself on the back for trying hard. You have to find that 0.01% mechanical adjustment.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. When you talk about the consequences of a technical breakdown, the missed target in the biathlon or catching an edge on a snowboard, you are actually highlighting exactly why defensive depth is the ultimate safety net. And defensive depth is an inherently volume-based internal metric.
What do you mean by defensive depth?
Let's go back to basketball, specifically the South Carolina women's program. And we can even look ahead to the NCAA Division I Indoor Track and Field Championships. Over 650 athletes are converging in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It is an absolute meat grinder. In women's track, the SEC is so dominant that simply placing in a conference race is sometimes harder than winning a national title elsewhere. So how do SEC track programs or a team like South Carolina in basketball maintain this era-defining dominance? It is through an internal defensive foundation.
You're talking about their floor, not their ceiling.
Exactly. In basketball, your jump shot might not fall on a given night. Your technical precision, your technical check might completely fail you. But rebounding, boxing out, defensive positioning, that is pure effort. That is your defensive depth. It is a baseline habit. When the offensive execution isn't working, your defensive depth is what keeps you in the arena until the technique returns. We see this with Michaela Schifrin in alpine skiing, too. She maintains her overall World Cup lead through multidisciplined consistency. She doesn't have to win every single slalom race perfectly because her baseline is so high across the board. If you're doing a persistence audit right now, ask yourself, what is my defensive depth? What are the baseline habits that keep me in the game when I'm not scoring, when my technique is off? Persistence is an inherently internal engine. It is the refusal to leave the court when the shot isn't falling.
I love the concept of defensive depth. I really do. But viewing persistence as a purely internal individualistic engine ignores the reality of how elite performance is actually sustained in the darkest, most high-pressure moments. This brings me to the third pillar of this audit, the guide factor.
The guide factor. Explain that.
Let us look at the visually impaired athletes competing in para-alpine skiing disciplines, specifically the downhill and giant slalom events, showcasing some of the absolute fastest speeds at Milano-Cortina. Imagine hurtling down a treacherous icy mountain at 70 miles an hour and you cannot see the gates. Your vision is entirely compromised. How do they do it? They do it by functioning as synchronized racing teams with their guides. The guide skis ahead, communicating constantly over a headset.
It is an unbelievable amount of trust.
It is total synchronized certainty. In a high-stress arena, internal vision, whether literal or metaphorical, gets clouded. Panic sets in, fatigue distorts your reality. If you rely solely on that internal engine you praise, it can actually drive you right off the course. True persistence at the elite level requires an external anchor. It requires a mentor, a coach, a guide, or a highly specific data point that acts as your signal when your own focus is compromised. Even your South Carolina example, their defensive depth isn't just an internal choice made by 5 isolated players. It is a synchronized system orchestrated by Dawn Staley and her coaching staff. You cannot simply tough your way down a giant slalom course if you cannot see the turns. If listeners are writing their own persistence audit, the most important question might be, who is your guide? Who do you outsource your sight to when you cannot see the path?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it implies the athlete somehow lacks the internal capacity to redefine their own limits. Yes, guides are crucial, coaching is crucial, but the athlete still has to make the turn. To fully grasp this, we have to look at legacy benchmarking and the broader state of resilience. Look no further than American Paralympic icon Oksana Masters.
An absolute legend.
She is already the most decorated U.S. Winter Paralympian, returning to these 2026 Games to add to an incredible tally of 14 winter medals and 19 total medals across sports. She competes across both Nordic skiing and biathlon, and she's medaled in summer sports like cycling and rowing. Her cross-discipline dominance proves my fundamental point. Continually redefining your limits and willingly increasing your start count in entirely new arenas is the ultimate resilience audit. She didn't just master one event and rest on her laurels. She willingly submitted herself to the awkward, painful conditioning phase over and over again in new sports.
She is the definition of constantly resetting the start count.
Exactly, and we see this principle operating on a macro level right now with the growth of women's sports media. Look at the expanding coverage of the WNBA. Look at international women's soccer leagues like the NWSL and the WSL. Look at the WTA tennis tours gearing up for Indian Wells and the Miami Open. For decades, the structural volume of games was always there, but the visibility wasn't. Now, look what's happening. The sheer volume of storytelling, the relentless scheduling, the expanding media platforms. This immense start count of visibility is what is forcing a global breakthrough in demand. Volume eventually breaks the dam. When you accumulate enough starts, whether you are Oksana Masters or an entire sports league, the ecosystem has to bend to your persistence.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that Oksana Masters is actually the ultimate manifestation of the technical check rather than just an accumulator of volume?
How so? She has 19 medals. That is the definition of volume.
Yes, 19 total medals is a staggering number of starts and finishes, but para-cross-country skiing and the biathlon test endurance across long-distance courses that often result in the most physically devastating finishes of the Games. You see athletes completely collapsing across the line. What separates Oksana Masters from the rest of the pack isn't just that she has rowed, cycled, and skied more miles than anyone else. It is that she flawlessly balances her pacing strategy with technical efficiency across vastly different body mechanics. When she switches from Nordic skiing to the biathlon, she is adapting her technical efficiency to accommodate precision shooting. When she cycles, she is adapting to a totally different mechanical output. Her legacy is a testament to the fact that persistence is about adapting your technique across different environments, not just stubbornly stepping up to the starting line.
But she had to be willing to start at zero in those new sports to learn that technique.
True, but she didn't win until the technique was mastered.
And regarding your point on women's sports media, I think you're misdiagnosing why the dam broke. The platforms aren't just broadcasting volume. The product itself is at an all-time high. The technical quality of the soccer matches in the NWSL, the absolute precision of the tennis we are about to see at Indian Wells, the athletes are performing at a level that cannot be ignored. The media isn't creating the breakthrough, they are finally capturing the 0.01 margin of excellence that these women have perfected. The volume is just the distribution, the technique is what hooks the audience.
So if we are bringing this all together for the listener, if someone is sitting at home right now looking at a goal that feels monumental and they want to put themselves through this persistence audit, my position remains that it must begin by looking at the start count. Whether we are talking about Laura Piravanu's grueling 120 attempts before a World Cup win, the young UConn basketball roster absorbing the friction of the regular season to build a psychological shield, or the relentless baseline consistency of a Michaela Schifrin, the empirical evidence points to a clear reality. You must ensure you have the raw volume, the defensive depth, and the conditioning runway to even place yourself in a position to win. If you have not accumulated the starts, you simply have not earned the breakthrough. Persistence is fundamentally the act of continually showing up when the outcome is uncertain. Your first action item is simply increase the starts.
And my conclusion remains that without the technical check and the guide factor, raw volume is merely a recipe for exhaustion and burnout. The difference between a participant and a champion lives in the 0.01 second margin of high-stress execution. Whether it is the delicate physiological balance of heart rate and accuracy in the para-biathlon, the synchronized certainty of visually impaired skiers relying completely on their guides at 70 miles an hour at Milano-Cortina, or the mechanical mastery required to not crash on a para-snowboard cross-track, persistence is about precision. It is the willingness to find the microscopic adjustment required to win, and having the humility to rely on external synchronization to guide you there. If your start count is high and you still aren't winning, don't just try harder. Find your guide and fix the 0.01%.
I think we can certainly acknowledge a profound point of convergence here, which is exactly what a good audit should produce. Elite persistence clearly cannot be measured by simple goal tracking or ticking boxes on a calendar. It requires a rigorous, honest look at both sides of the coin. You need the raw endurance, the conditioning phase of accumulating starts and building defensive depth, but you also need the technical efficiency and the external guides to survive the absolute highest pressure of the results phase.
Exactly. It requires the baseline habits to keep you in the arena when you are struggling and the synchronized precision to actually conquer it when the moment arrives. You need both the floor and the ceiling.
There is so much more to observe regarding these frameworks in the immediate future. Over the next few days, we have 650 collegiate athletes heading to Fayetteville for the NCAA Indoor Track Championships to test their defensive depth. And we still have 79 medal events left to unfold at the Milano-Cortina Paralympics, where those razor-thin 0.01 margins are going to be decided. We leave it to you to determine how to construct your own persistence audit using these tools. Thank you for joining us.